While it is gorgeous out there today and tomorrow, unfortunately, in about 19 days, we will be starting the 2021 hurricane season. And tonight on the forecast with Stingray and TP, we will go through the preparedness tips to get you ready for the 2021 potentially active tropical storm and hurricane season only on the forecast with Stingray and TP. Welcome inside another exciting edition of the Forecast with Stingray and TP. I am your host, Stephen Ray, and over there is Taylor Plott. Taylor, how are you doing tonight, sir?
Pretty good, Stephen. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. And so we are about 19 days away from the start of yet another hurricane season. And unfortunately, it looks like that this one could be pretty rough as well.
Yeah, it's possible. It's definitely possible based on historical events in the past several years of hurricane seasons. Usually, when you have a La Nina going to a weekend La Nina, which you actually have now been confirmed by the National Weather Service and NOAA, that is now basically in a neutral phase. So we are no longer really in a La Nina pattern. So usually that does spell a little bit more active weather across the Atlantic basin. But there is something else I'm keeping an eye on. I'll have that talk about that coming up a little bit later on. But it's something that I've been keeping my eye on that could be a little bit interesting.
Okay, well, let's go ahead now and talk with everybody about the preparedness. And I want to really quick show you guys this. Give me just a second. All right. So there, of course, is your named systems for the upcoming season for the 2021. You can see Anna, Bill, Claudette, Danny, Elisa, Fred, Grace, all the way down to W. And, Taylor, last year, I think it was, we saw 32 named storms. That was an unprecedented season last year.
It was. It was very active to say the least. And there's actually add another major hurricane to the list when the hurricane. I'm blanking on it. Was it Zeta? Was it Zeta that they upgraded?
Yes.
Yeah, they upgraded to that at Category 3, which was kind of figured. We figured in the weather community based on the observations we saw when it was making landfall and some of the wind reports. But I've never seen us get basically to the smack dab middle of the Greek alphabet.
Yes.
And that's just. Usually, if you have an active hurricane season, like if you go back to 2005 when we had Hurricane Katrina, that was a very active season. We only got to, I think, it might have been beta in the Greek alphabet. I mean, it was maybe like the first three letters of the Greek alphabet, and then it was we were done with all the storms. This one got to like number 12 or
Yes.
something. It got a long way into the Greek alphabet. And actually, interesting enough, we no longer have the Greek alphabet. It has been tossed aside, and now we
Right.
just have a completely different set of names. We call them kind of the substitute names, to just in case we get through Wanda
Yes.
on our 2021 hurricane list. We have another list that starts from A and also goes all the way through W in
Yes.
our alphabet.
Okay, so the first thing that you need to do when there is an impending hurricane coming towards your area, you first need to go on ahead and determine your risk area. If you live near the coastline, if you live a little bit inland, if you live far away from the area. You can have storm surge. You can have tornadoes. You can have rip currents, strong winds, and inland flooding as well.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that if people down here who've lived down here for several years, they know pretty much how to deal with hurricanes along the coast. But you also every single year have to go through preparedness. Just make sure you got everything set up. Just know if you've moved, know what type of stuff can happen in the location you now have moved into. I mean, there's definitely places where if you move from, say, uh, close to Mobile Bay, where
Yeah.
you also deal with hurricane stuff, but if you move all the way across into parts of Florida, your issues might be a little bit different. You might have more storm surge over there than you did over in your previous place. So if you've moved, it's really, really good to actually see what you've moved into hurricane threat wise. But yeah, definitely know your risk. It will definitely vary from storm to storm. Every
Right.
storm's completely different. So while you might have a category 2 come rolling down your neighborhood, you might only see wind damage
Yes.
and not really much in the way of storm surge, just by the way that sets up. But you might have a tropical storm that comes through that only is packing winds of about 70 miles per hour, 60 miles per hour, and all of a sudden you got about 3 foot of storm surge.
Right.
So, I mean, it could definitely vary from storm to storm.
Okay, so then after you determine what your risk is, you need to go on ahead and develop an evacuation plan. Find out if you live in an evacuation zone. Have a go bag for supplies. Follow evacuation orders if given. Plan several different routes to go in the event that you do prepare to leave for a hurricane. And as also, don't forget about our furry friends. Plan for your pets as well.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the big things with this is we can't preach this enough. Just use common sense. I mean, if you're staring down with you have a mandatory evacuation, go. Even if
Yes,
you have a voluntary evacuation, I would go ahead and just plan on going,
yes,
because it's always better be safe than sorry. So yeah, just know which way to go.
yes.
FEMA has, I believe, websites available to look at with evacuation routes. I know that the Weather Service is down along the Gulf Coast, Mobile, Tallahassee,
Mhm.
Miami, all those guys down there. Uh, they have stuff you can look at that show what to do. Just like we're looking at here, this is from the
Yes,
Weather Service, the Hurricane Center.
right.
So just yeah, go through these steps if you're dealing with a storm come rolling on in, but go ahead and plan before that. Just like we're talking about, just already have things in place to where if you have that evacuation order set in stone, you're golden. You're gone.
Okay, find out. All right, here we go. Have a go bag for supplies. Okay, so
Hmm.
you may be wondering what is a go bag? This is
So
it.
yeah.
Make sure you have a disaster supplies are ready to go, and there is your
Hmm.
emergency kit for what you need to have planned in case you either leave or in case you stay. That is your list of emergency kits. first aid kit, mosquito repellent, sunscreen, important documents such as records, your social security number, your insurance policy, and family photos, cash, credit card. Okay, battery powered radio and or a weather radio, cell phone chargers, solar or battery powered, 3 days supply of water and non-perishable foods, extra clothing and shoes, prescription medicines, special need items, a flashlight, extra batteries, tools, extra set of keys, and etc., etc.
Yeah, and this is basically just a cut and paste of what you should have in your safe place when we're dealing with tornadoes. So basically, I know a lot of people that, especially living in the coast, they have their safe place and they have a little kit in there, and it's for both tornadoes and hurricanes. So when it's time to go for hurricane stuff, they literally just take that out of the closet, and you're good to go.
Right.
So yeah, just one of the main important things to do with this kit is, number one, especially if you have prescriptions, make sure you have that. Another thing is, if you have prescriptions like that, make sure that they're already filled. I know
Yeah.
if you go through a monthly basis and stuff, make sure that it's filled to where you don't have to worry about, oh well, dang, I've got this in there, but I've only got about 5 pills left, and that's about
Right.
2 days worth or something.
Yes.
So just kind of think ahead with those things. But yeah, just make sure you have all the necessities taken care of. Make sure that if you have to leave your property, you have enough food, enough water, just in case for some reason you end up getting stranded on the roadways, and you'll
Yes.
be good to go.
Now, here is what you need to do about water wise. You should have 1 gallon of water per person per day for drinking and sanitation, whether you leave or you stay.
Yeah, and that's the recommended daily value is about a gallon a day. But
Yes.
I know some people, including me in general, or meaning me as well, I drink I don't know how many gallons of water a day. It's definitely more than one. But yeah, just make sure you have at least a gallon of water for each person per day.
Yes.
Those jugs that you see there in that picture for those water dispensers, like you see
Yes.
at offices and stuff, that'd be perfect to have that, because you can store a lot in there, and you don't really have to have that big water dispenser to use it. You can
Yes.
get it out other ways than that.
Okay. Now, if you decide to stay, this is your hurricane preparedness for your home. Make sure that you cover windows with hurricane shutters or pre cut plywood. Uh, Develop an evacuation plan like we've already gone over. Bring all outdoor furniture and anything else that is not secured inside. All right, set refrigerator to its coldest setting. Place valuables and personal papers in a waterproof container on the highest level of your home, and make sure you keep all trees and shrubs well trimmed.
Yeah, and if you're going to stay at home, most of the time it's going to be, you're dealing with either tropical storm or a lower end hurricane and
Yes,
stuff. You can get through that, especially if you're living in a site built home down there. But yeah, you definitely want to prepare for that. Know where your home improvement stores are located, your Lowe's, Home Depot, places like that, to where you can go get your lumber, your plywood, to go put onto your windows and stuff to board up. And just one of the things that Stephen mentioned there, your trees. If you have trees around, make
yeah,
sure that they're trimmed. I mean, you don't want to have a very much overgrown tree and a hurricane coming through, because that could be a disaster waiting to happen, to where you
yeah,
just get these big limbs falling on your house. So yeah, just if you're going to stay, make sure you have the necessities not only to stay, but your home is prepared as well, so it can give you the best protection possible.
yes. Okay, so how to strengthen your home before, or a business before a hurricane or tropical storm comes in. like you said, trim the trees, secure all the doors, cover the windows, secure loose outdoor items, and move vehicles to a safe location.
Yeah, one of the big things that you do to strengthen your home is to cover your windows.
Yes.
And yeah, trimming trees, secure all the doors and stuff like that. That's good. But one of the big things is making sure that the wind can't get in, because the
Yes.
wind does the same thing as a tornado would, which is it can get in and under things, and all of a sudden it's starting to lift things up. That's how the tornado destroys houses. They can lift things up because the wind can get in. So make sure that you got all the windows definitely fully secured, your doors secured as well, so the wind it can't get in, or if it does, it's having a very hard time doing that. So you can help prevent from not only uh, the wind starting to kind of lift things up, but the wind coming in can cause havoc too. I've seen several videos in the past where you have these hurricanes come through and the window gets knocked out, and all of a sudden the wind's just tossing things inside the house. You've got glass flying everywhere, and it ends up being a bad situation.
Yes. Okay, so you may be wondering where all of the watches and warnings for hurricanes come from and all of the graphics. We are looking now at the National Hurricane Center down in Miami, Florida. That is where these guys issue all of the watches, the warnings, and of course the tropical storm, tropical depression, and advisories on the hurricanes as they progress from Africa all the way over across the Atlantic and into the United States of America. That is with the National Hurricane Center down in Miami, Florida.
Yeah, and they've got just the smartest people in the world down
Yes.
there. Just like the Storm Prediction Center over there in Norman, Oklahoma. It's some of the smartest people when it comes to severe weather and tornadoes. These people down here at the Hurricane Center Miami are just as good.
Yes.
And they've done a phenomenal job over the past several years, kind of revamping things. They've added different kind of procedures, if you will, with doing the naming and the when they issue advisories. One of the things that has come out recently is you end up getting these what they call potential tropical cyclones. In the past, what you've had is you'll have these areas of disturbance called an invest. So you're investigating it,
Hmm.
and they had to wait until you had a very close center of circulation and the winds from the satellite or either buoy observations were of at least 30 to 25 to 30 miles per hour, so they can give it a tropical depression designation. One of the things they've done now is they can do that without a well-defined center, but it's getting really, really close, and they can issue advisories in advance of that, so they can get put the cone out there, the cone of uncertainty. They can issue watches and warnings, and they can give people sometimes a couple of days heads up before the thing actually becomes a depression. So guys down there are just the best, and they continue to get better on a daily basis, not only with dealing things on the scientific end, but also on the public end as well, getting information out.
Okay, so Taylor, we have gone through the preparedness. Now let's go through what issues you can have from hurricanes. And I
Mm-hmm.
think we will start with the Saffir Simpson scale of hurricane winds. Okay, when a tropical storm reaches hurricane strength, it is when it has winds of 74 miles per hour, up from 74 all the way up to 95 miles per hour. That is a category 1. Very dangerous winds will produce some damage. Okay, when you go up to 96 miles per hour, up to 110, that is a category 2 hurricane. An extremely dangerous wind will cause extensive damage. Okay, when you get up to 111 miles per hour, we're talking about a Category 3 hurricane between winds of 111 and 129. And if memory serves me correctly, I believe Hurricane Ivan was a Category 3 at landfall that struck Gulf Shores and Orange Beach. Now,
I believe that's right.
Category 3 can do damage, devastating winds will occur. Now, a Category 4 goes from 130 up to 156. Catastrophic damage will occur. And then a Category 5 is 157 miles per hour winds or higher. And I think, if memory serves me correctly, Hugo, Andrew, and Camille were all Category 5s at landfall.
Yes, that is correct.
So if you get a 3, a 4, or a 5 doing at landfall, this is going to be a significant weather event for the coastal areas.
Yeah, and I always tell people that if you live on the coastal area, you can withstand or kind of hang in there down the coast with Category 1 and even a Category 2. But once you get to 3, 4, and 5, you need to get out of there.
Yes.
There's no sense in being down there to try to outlast those type of systems. I mean, it's just
Right.
it's not smart by any means. That's one of the things, going back to what we talked about earlier. Use common sense. That's
Yeah.
going to be your greatest tool through this, is use common sense. And sometimes common sense would be, if you're dealing with a Category 2, get out. That's
Yes.
perfectly fine. Better safe than sorry. But once you really get into the 3s, 4s, and 5s, you need to be gone
Yes.
by the time it gets to your spot.
Okay, so so you were talking about Category 3, Category 4, and Category 5. Okay, Category 3, like we said, 111 to 129. Devastating damage will occur. Well-built framed homes may incur major damage or removal of roof, decking, and gable ends. Many trees will be snapped or uprooted, blocking numerous roads, and electricity and water will be unavailable for several days to weeks after the storm passes. That's where that's a Category 3. Category 4, power outages may last weeks to possibly months, and most of the area will be uninhabitable for weeks or months, and that's even including a Category 5.
Yeah, I mean, just like I said, once you get to that Category 3, 4, and 5, there's
Yes.
really no sense to be down there. I mean, you're talking about going to have widespread significant damage that's going to be affected for days, if not weeks,
Right.
on end. I mean, if you look at when Hurricane Michael hit just to the east of Panama City,
Yes.
I mean, that was, was it a Category
It was a
4?
5.
It was okay. It was a 5. I was thinking
Yeah.
it was definitely up there. I mean, you had places that were without power for, I know, at least it was over a month, at
Yes.
least, because of just how big and how bad the infrastructure damage was. So, I mean, if you live in these places and you're expecting a 3, 4, or 5, you need to not only just leave, but you need
Yes.
to plan on, you won't be back for maybe several weeks to a month.
Right. Okay. So we've talked about that. Okay. Hurricanes, like I said, produce winds of 74 miles per hour or greater. Now, listen. Now, here is the issue between a tornado and a hurricane. A tornado comes within 30 seconds to 2 minutes. Boom, it's gone, just like that. A hurricane winds of 74 all the way up to 157 miles per hour or higher can last for hours at a time over a area. And that is why hurricanes can be so deadly. It's because winds of 100, think about this, Taylor. Think about winds of 140 to 150 sitting over one single area for 4 hours.
That's
Okay,
just incredible.
That's going to do a lot of damage. That is why these hurricanes, when you get up there, category 2 or higher, can be very, very, very significant. All right, now listen. The strongest winds will be located near the eye of the storm and is what is called the eye wall. Now, the images over here, right over here that you're seeing there, depicts wind damage in Baton Rouge area, which is further inland with Hurricane Gustav back in 2008.
Yeah, and you just to piggyback on what you said, I mean, there are even some of these hurricanes that when they get close to the shore, they just kind of stall out. And so instead of it kind of rolling on through where you might only get about an hour or so of the strongest winds, now
Yeah,
you're sitting there 3, 4, maybe even 5 hours, and you're
yeah,
dealing with just these horrendous strong winds coming on through, and they just do a ton of damage,
right.
and just a prolonged period of it just makes it just so much worse.
Okay, so now not only if you live near the coast do you have a wind threat, you also have a wind threat inland depending on how big the system is and how fast it's moving. This is from the National Weather Service in Birmingham back when Hurricane Ivan came through central Alabama. Places along and south of Highway 80 saw winds of 60 to 80 miles per hour, and the rest of west and central Alabama saw winds of 50 to 60 miles per hour, which caused widespread wind damage even as far north as Tuscaloosa, Birmingham, Anniston, and Gadsden with Hurricane Ivan back in 2004.
Yeah, and it all depends on the track, like you said, how big the storm is. The bigger the storm, the longer it takes for it to wind down. So
Yes,
if you have I mean, just even if you have a category 2 or 3, it just depending on how it moves and stuff like that, you could still be dealing with either a minimal hurricane or a tropical storm all the way through the Birmingham area.
yes,
There's been tropical storms, and I want to say there's been at least one category 1 hurricane that made it all the way into northern Alabama.
yes.
So, I mean, it can happen. It's not always the case, but it definitely can happen to where you have a great wind threat and even flooding threat all well inland from these coastal areas.
Okay. So now we've talked about one of the issues. Now let's go to the more significant threat other than the wind, and that is going to be the storm surge, my friend, because storm surge can do a lot of damage and even possibly more damage than the wind in some locations. Now, a storm surge is an abnormal rise of water generated by a storm over and above the predicted astronomical tides. Okay, so that is what storm surge literally is. Historically, greatest threat to life and property from a tropical storm and or a hurricane is the storm surge. And so that is probably, I would say, Taylor, correct me if I'm wrong, your number one threat from a hurricane is going to be storm surge, then wind damage, then flooding.
Yeah, that's spot on. I mean, one of the things that people don't really think about when it comes to hurricanes is the storm surge factor. They immediately think of, oh, there's
Wind.
the wind and there's heavy rain coming on through. But what happens is if when you get a very, very strong center of circulation, area low pressure out in the open waters, the waves start getting churned up. You get a lot of wave action over there. And what happens is once it starts to move on shore, you've got all the water being churned up, but you got to know the winds are pushing this too, that are
Yes.
making it churn. So once you get the storm that moves on, the wind that's coming out of the south on the right side of the storm, all that wind is pushing this water wherever it's going to, and it's going to hit the land. and it's just going to keep going up and up and up, just depending on how strong of a system it is. And once that moves through, then you're going to be on the better side of things. One of the other kind of cooler facts about the storm surge is on the opposite side, when you have winds coming from a more northerly direction, that's going to kind of push all the water out from the shore and even bays out into the open ocean. So
Yes.
there's could be cases where, like, if the hurricane's on the east side of Mobile Bay is going to see a much lower water level because the water's going to be pushed back into the Gulf. Whereas if you're on the, say, Orange Beach side or over to Pensacola, you're just get hammered with water coming right into you.
Yes. Now, that is scary right there. Storm
Mm-hmm.
surge flooding has accounted for nearly half of the deaths associated with landfalling tropical cyclones over the past 50 years. That is why storm surge flooding is the number one killer of hurricanes, followed by the wind.
Yeah, it's again, when people think of hurricanes, they immediately kind of go to the wind and heavy rain. But the
Yes.
storm surge is one of the most deadly aspects of a tropical system by far. And it's one thing that you have the power of the wind, but the power of water is just incredible.
Yes.
It's almost mind blowing in a sense to just see how, not only beautiful things can be on the water side of things, looking at the ocean and stuff, but just how deadly it can get as well.
Yes. Okay, so what is the difference between a storm surge watch and a storm surge warning? Okay, a storm surge watch is there as a possibility of life threatening inundation from rising water moving inland from the shoreline, generally within 48 hours. At this right now, if you were under a watch, if you were, promptly follow evacuation and other instructions from local officials. But if a storm surge warning is issued, then it will be coming to you within 36 hours. So that is the difference between a watch and a warning. The watch means you are within 48 hours of having that life threatening inundation from the water. When you get to 36 hours within, that's when they issue the storm surge warning. And then that's when things really start going downhill as you reach closer to the landfall time frame.
Yeah, and all it's doing is just kind of honing in on
Yes,
where the more destructive or more dangerous, I would say, storm surge will be. So it's kind of think of it as like a storm prediction center outlook. I mean,
yes,
you're kind of focusing in on where the biggest area of concentration of storm surge is going to be. So if you
yes,
are definitely under that watch, you need to take that seriously, prepare for it. But if you get under that warning, then you need to take action, almost like you would with a tornado warning or
yes,
severe thunderstorm warning, or just a warning in general. You need to act once that is issued.
yes. Okay, so storm surge vulnerability. Okay, storm surge of 23 feet from the National Weather Service in Mobile. The storm surge of 23 feet has the ability to inundate 67% of interstates, 57% of arterials. Okay, almost half of rail miles, 29 airports, and virtually all ports in the Gulf Coast area.
Yeah, that's. I mean, that's just mind blowing, and that's all. That's for the mo. That's for. Is that for the Mobile area? Or is that
Yes.
for the just the Gulf Coast?
It looks like that's from the National Weather Service in Mobile, but I read that as the Gulf Coast area.
I kind of read that as well. I mean, if you think of it as just take it from Brownsville, Texas, all the way to, just go ahead and say, Key West, Florida,
Yep.
just go around the bend there. If that's, I mean, that's incredible to
Yes.
think that, you're talking about some major interstates there, I-10.
Yes.
is down there. That's the big one that runs from Jacksonville all the way to San Diego, California. And there's tons of ports down there. Mobile is literally like the biggest port city along the
Yes.
Gulf Coast. And if you get this much storm surge, that's just devastating.
Yes. All right. So that is, of course, the storm surge. Now you've also got to worry about the inland flooding threat with rainfall from these systems as well, because these storm systems can produce a lot of rain and produce anywhere from 10 all the way up to 30 to 40 inches of rain, which I do believe, I think it was Hurricane Harvey
Mm-hmm.
in Houston
Yep.
dropped 40 inches of rain. So it is very possible for these systems to produce anywhere from 10 inches all the way up to even 40 inches of rain.
And it's all part of it being tropical.
Yes,
There's a thing in meteorology that we call precipitable water, or PWAT for short. And what that means is if you have a PWAT value of 1 inch, just
yes,
think about if you take a wash rag and you dip it in a bucket of water and you wring all the water out. If you do that with the atmosphere, dip it to the atmosphere and wring all the water out of the atmosphere, it's going to end up being 1 inch of water. So that's one of the values we look at to see how, just not only how moist, but how much just water is available in the atmosphere to come out. And we get these tropical systems, there's PWAT values, well above 1 inch for sure. You can get about
yes,
3, 4, even 5 inches or more. And that just, if you have this system that rolls in, it just wrings all that moisture out, you're going to get dumped with,
yes,
inch after inch after inch of rainfall. So it's just because of the tropical nature of it. I mean, think about it this way: where is it forming? It's forming over water, it's not forming over land. So it already has that advantage of, it has all the moisture availability it can have, and that's the ocean.
yes.
And it just, sucks all that in. You get the storm going, and it is just going to dump rain, rain after rain, inch after inch after inch across areas.
Right. Okay. Results of heavy rain was the number one killer from tropical systems for much of the past 2 decades. Inland flooding is the second most dangerous hazard associated with tropical storms. And there you can see the graph: 50% is storm surge, 25 rainfall induced flooding, and then the rest is the other stuff.
Yeah, and just right away you can already see how big that storm surge issue is that we've talked
Yes,
about. But yeah, inland flooding is just as bad. So while you might not deal with the storm surge if you're further inland, you could still end up getting about 20 inches of rain, and
yes.
you're dealing with major flooding issues.
Now,
And it could be just as bad, if not even worse, than the storm surge.
now, Taylor, I do not have a graphic because we really don't have that much of an issue, but there is a 5% up there of tornadoes. And yes, hurricanes can produce small tornadoes within either the eye wall or the spiral rain bands that come through at landfall. But the most significant threat of tornadoes would be to the right of the center. All right, so if a hurricane was going to make landfall in Gulf Shores, the best chance of seeing a tornado would be from Gulf Shores and points east over to Destin.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I tell people is that if you look at a storm on the satellite view, just draw a line right through the middle from north and south, and wherever it is east of that, that's where you have your tornado threat. You
Yes,
don't have to technically be on the southeast side or directly the Dewey side. You can anywhere from northeast,
Yes.
east, and southeast, that right quadrant, that right half of the circulation.
Right.
There's just so much spin, and the helicity values are just enormous, that you get these circulations. Now the good thing is, because they don't have really strong updrafts, you
Right.
don't really get big time tornadoes with them. You can still, I've definitely seen EF2 and EF3 tornadoes being produced by tropical systems. And
Right.
one of the other things, I'm not going to get into too big details with it, but you can have setups to where it can merge with a upper level system across parts of either the southeast or wherever the storm's making landfall, and it kind of morph itself into your typical severe weather tornado outbreak scenario. I've seen it happen here in Alabama
Yes.
before, where all of a sudden you've got some upper level support. The storm updrafts can get a little bit stronger, and now you're talking about a chance to see some of the stronger tornadoes, EF2 or greater, out of them. They've happened before, and they'll happen again. But for the majority of them, you're talking about your quick, they're up or they're down and they're back up again, EF0 to EF1s.
Taylor, you were talking about you've seen it happen in Alabama. It was with Hurricane Rita
Mm-hmm.
in
Yep.
2005. Tuscaloosa County had 10 tornadoes touch down in this county from one system. The name was Hurricane Rita.
Yep, and there was also another one, I want to say, was back in like the 60s or the 70s.
Right.
Might have been 80s. Have to go back and look. But it merged with a upper level system, like I mentioned, and you get that
Yes.
dynamic support, and it turns into your typical springtime severe weather setup. Good instability, and you had about like 3 or 4 F3s, and it really packed a punch. So while
Yes.
it's not common that you get that, it can happen, and it's happened recently as at least 2005. I know there's probably one between about 2010 and now. I can't
Yes.
put my finger on it, but I know I've seen it. But it will happen again, to where you'll just end up getting a setup to where, well, now you're kind of dealing with a full blown tornado outbreak, where you're dealing with not only the weak tornadoes, but you can get some strong ones out there too.
Okay, so if we talked about the inland flooding, we talked about the storm surge. Now let's talk about a unfortunate thing for people along the coast, and this is this right here. It takes 30 days for flood insurance to begin. That means if you were worried about this hurricane season, go on ahead and sign up for flood insurance now. Do not wait
Mm-hmm.
until it's too late.
Yeah,
Because
exactly. It's one
it
of the big things you need.
and it takes 30 days for it to get active.
Yeah, that's another one of the things that I don't know how many people honestly know that. It's not one of those things where you sign a piece of paper and
It's
it's done.
instant.
It's instant. It's not instant. You've
Right.
got a period before it kicks in.
Yes.
So if you need flood insurance, do it now. I recommend that you go and try to get it set up tomorrow if you
Yes.
can. Definitely do it before the season begins.
Because that is rather significant.
Very significant.
So I've got two other graphics. Give me just a second. Okay, so we've talked about the wind. Okay, so we were talking earlier about the forecast cone. Would you like to explain to everybody, Taylor, what the forecast cone is?
Yeah. So basically, in a nutshell, it's where the center of circulation could end up during that time frame. It's just, think of it as I'm drawing a storm track on a cell that's coming up into Tuscaloosa County. It can get close to Tuscaloosa, then eventually to Birmingham. when I draw that track out, it's not in a straight line. It fans out
Yes.
because it gives what's called the possible error in where things can go. So the further out you get, the more error you can get in the projection. So the hurricane track is the same thing. Now sometimes it's based on the model guidance that the Hurricane Center has. There's really big high resolution data that goes into this. It's a lot better than what it has been in the past decade or so. And sometimes we'll get these cones to where the forecast guidance is pretty spot on within about a 50 mile radius. So that cone is going to be a little bit smaller. And sometimes you're going to get this forecast guidance that you get things going here, there, everywhere, and all of a sudden the cone's a little bit more bigger. Right. So it's all based on the model data, the guidance that it has. But one of the big misconceptions on the hurricane track is that if you're outside of the cone, that doesn't mean you're not going to see that they think that it means you're not going to see impacts. That's
Right.
not true. It doesn't mean that's where the impacts are going to be. That's saying where the center, where
Yeah.
the eye is going to be or potentially be over the next several days. So it could be that if you take a look at this graphic right here, if you go all the way to where it makes landfall along the South Carolina, Georgia coast, if that eye is over there, that means that you're seeing impacts in Savannah. That means you're seeing impacts in Jacksonville, even though you're not in the cone, because that's where the eye goes. It could be on the far right side of things to where, okay, now it's getting to Virginia Beach or
Yes.
the Outer Banks. So it's based on where the center of circulation is. But that's not how big the storm is. The storm could be hundreds of miles in width and significant impacts from miles away from the center. Yeah, you're circling. Yeah, the
Yeah.
cone does not take into account the size of the storm. That
I
is
wish I could
exactly what
highlight
it
that.
is.
I
Do
wish I
what?
could highlight that.
Yeah, that's what it is. So again, what the cone is on the scientific side of things is you're taking projections based on models and the error within those models potentially. So that gets the width of the cone. So if you have model guidance that's pretty spot on for several days, it's kind of you take those little spaghetti plots that we show sometimes. If they're kind of close
Yes.
together, the cone is going to be a little bit more smaller. But if they're really strung out, they're far apart, that cone is going to be bigger. So that's what the cone is uncertainty is. But the big thing that you want to know and remember is that it's talking about where the center is
Yeah.
going. So you might not be where the center is, but that doesn't mean you're not going to see impacts. So you could be 100 miles away from the center and you're still getting damaging winds, storm surge, and flooding.
And once again, hurricane strength winds can reach far inland, depending primarily on two factors: the intensity in landfall and the storm motion, which is the forward speed. Hurricane winds that impact inland areas can cause significant damage to trees, houses, and other critical infrastructures. And just like with a tropical storm, I'm sorry, just like with a tornado, if you are in a mobile home, you might want to consider evacuating to a safer shelter during a tropical storm and or a hurricane.
And it's just goes back to what I was talking about earlier. And it's the wind, it picks stuff up, it gets underneath things and lifts it. So with the mobile home, the tornado has very easy access to get underneath that thing
Yes.
and toss it, rip it to shreds. And you're in a very bad situation if you're inside. Hurricanes do the same thing. It's just the wind. The wind goes and it can get underneath that mobile home, lift it up, and toss it down the road, and you're in a bad predicament if you're inside of that. One of the interesting things with the hurricane wind is people wonder, well, why does it weaken when it hits land and stuff? It not only has to do with you're losing the water source, which is its fuel, but there's a thing in science that's called friction. Everybody knows what friction is. You rub your hands together like that, and all of a sudden your hands getting warm.
Right.
Well, the wind and the circulation deals with the same thing. When it's over open water, you have very little friction to work with because it's water. It's just I can't really get into big details because I have to
Yes.
really get scientific about it. But just think of it as it's just this nice glass plane, if you will. It's smooth, it's not rough, and it's just things can just glide on top of it without any issue. When
Right.
the storm moves on shore, now it's dealing with land, it's dealing with trees, it's dealing with structures. It's you got a lot more friction to work with, and so it's slowing it down once it starts to move inland. Now, of course, there's other factors that can lead to, if it's coming in fast, it will, take a longer time for it to slow down and stuff like that. But basically, in a nutshell, friction is one of the big things of why the winds get weaker as you go further inland. And it's just due to it's just getting a lot more resistance with it.
Okay, look at this graphic right here. I'm talking about the top one. Okay,
Hmm.
we had a hurricane, a pretty significant hurricane, hit the coast of Louisiana, hit New Orleans, and then hit Gulfport, Bay Springs, and Biloxi, Mississippi. Now, guys, think about this. Wrap this around your head. Hurricane force winds were still active when this storm hit West Point and Caledonia, Mississippi, north of the city of Columbus. That's how far that system stayed a hurricane. Think about that for a second. From New Orleans and the coast of Louisiana to West Point and Columbus, Mississippi.
Hmm.
That's just mind blowing.
That just goes to show how big the storms can be.
Yes,
Usually with storms, you're going to have, if you get a Category 3 or even 4 storm, you're you're talking about the tropical storm force winds. That's winds 40, or I think it's technically 39 miles per hour up to
yeah,
74 miles per hour. Uh, they could be as wide as about 250 miles across. And then the hurricane force winds, they're only going to be about maybe 80 miles across. But
right.
there's sometimes, especially if you get these storms that get many eye wall replacement cycles, what happens is when you get eye wall replacement cycle, the wind fields expand. So if
Yes,
you get many of these cycles that go through, just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then all of a sudden you're talking about tropical storm force winds could be about 300 miles across. And then hurricane force winds could be about 200 miles across. So the wind field can get extremely wide, and it can be mind boggling at how big of an area you can see with hurricane force winds. And that doesn't mean that you're getting 80 mile or 150-mile-per-hour winds all throughout that location, but you're getting winds of 75 or higher through that entire area. So it can get pretty big. Yeah, the one that was the one that they upgraded, right, to
yes,
Category 3.
yep,
Yeah, so it moved pretty quick. It wasn't slow by any means, and it definitely wasn't super duper fast. But the way that it came in, the trajectory, and how strong it maintained its strength, it was still a Category 1 in Southwest Alabama. Matter of
yeah,
fact, I honestly think it was a Category 1 all the way up to when it crossed the I-65 corridor. I believe it was it between Birmingham and Montgomery? I
yes,
think it was closer to Montgomery, but it was definitely still packing a punch out there when it crossed the I-65 corridor into parts
right.
of central Alabama.
Okay, so Taylor, that's going to wrap up the hurricane preparedness portion of this show. But you wanted to show some of the active pattern for next week. So can you pop your computer back on Restream, please?
Yeah, and I
Let me
will
show that.
even talk about the. Well, I don't want the camera. I don't have a camera on that computer. Um, all right, it is. Oh, it was up, but I didn't have the join. So there you go.
Okay.
So, one of the things I want to talk about before I dive into the forecast for you guys over the next several days is one of the things that I think could be kind of starting out. I don't want to necessarily say on like a hot streak, but it could get pretty active pretty quickly. Is the fact that the waters down here in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean are very much abnormally warm for this time of year, and it's been very warm for the past several months. It's one of the reasons why we've had some pretty significant severe weather events down here in the south. It's just the Gulf of Mexico waters have been extremely warm. And one of the things, this is just one model run. I'm not saying that this is fact by any means, but it's I've been waiting to see if one of the models were going to start to hint at this possibility. So I'm going to kind of back away here. So remember, hurricane season officially starts on June 1st. That doesn't mean that we can't get stuff before then. And this is just, again, one run of the GFS, but look at what happens down here in the Caribbean. You start to get a lot more thunderstorm activity going on. Just remember, the waters down here are abnormally warmer for this time of year. And there you go. You start to get a depression that is forming across the central Gulf of Mexico, and it just kind of makes its way on up. It's not overly strong by any means, but it's just something that catches your eye. And then very late in the forecast, again, this is so far out, it's no man's land. You get funky things that happen in the model guidance, but you just look for signals, and there it is over the Bahamas. Another system right there that at the end of the model run here, 384 miles or hours out on the east coast of Florida. So again, it's not a forecast, but it's just something that I was waiting to see if we start getting these signals down here in the Gulf of Mexico. So do not be surprised by any means if we end up getting a some type of tropical system before June 1st happens. So I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I would not be surprised at all to see something kind of churn up down there in the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, between basically, I would say, the end of next week and the beginning of June. So it's definitely that that type of season potentially to where you can get an early start, and it'll be interesting to see how much we get. I think it could definitely continue to be active throughout the entire period. I think there's definitely going to be some lulls in there in some cases, kind of like what we saw last year, and it just gets picked back up right away. So it's just something that I've wanted to show that potential is there, that there could be something that forms before June 1st. So don't be surprised by that if it does happen. But just something I was kind of watching. So I just want to quickly go through your forecast for the next several days. It's going to get active across the plains. There will probably be at least some type of severe threat out there. I don't see anything that's like very eye-popping or severe weather outbreak material in the model guidance. But our nice stretch of weather that we've started here across the southeast is going to come to an end once we get into parts of next week. This is Monday evening, shower and storm potential here across the state of Alabama, even into Tuesday. These are not going to be your big widespread rainmakers. These are going to be more your pop-up variety, kind of summertime type of storms, showers and storms for your Monday and Tuesday. Wednesday, kind of the same thing, but notice how everything just stays off to the west. There could be places here across parts of the Central Plains into Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas that could see anywhere from about 3 to 5 inches of rain between, say, now and the end of next week. So they could be dealing with a lot of rain out there. And again, it looks like we might get into another drier period, but it's possible there could be some more stuff going on. There's that possible tropical system that the GFS is kind of pointing at right now. Keep an eye on that. And so, yeah, basically, we're going to get active again across the southeast. There could be some chances for some stronger storms in the mix, but I don't see any big time severe weather threat. I think that now we're kind of moving into the time of the severe weather season where we deal with more MCSs, these lines that develop either off to our north or off to our west, and they kind of track in. They have a damaging wind threat. Yes, there could still be a tornado threat here and there with any of them, but I think we're kind of going away now from your big time area low pressure prime spot tornado outbreak potentially across the area. I mean, we can still get those through, basically almost any time of the year, but we're getting to the point now to where we're kind of moving more towards everything kind of shifts over to the plains. And if they get a blow up with thunderstorms over there, it congeals into a line, and the line tracks in, and you're dealing with some strong damaging winds, and that fizzles out. So that's kind of the things that I'm looking at. But that was one of the things that kind of started catching my eye. I was waiting to see what model would start to hint at maybe some tropical mischief happening in the Caribbean or Gulf of Mexico, because it is just so warm down there water wise. And the fact that that's contributed to our severe weather season being pretty active down here in the South, it can also spell that, okay, we start to get a little bit more tropical stuff a little bit either before hurricane season officially starts or right as it starts. So it's possible that it could be one of those things where right off the bat, hurricane season starts off and it's pretty active. But I could easily see where it happens to be just kind of like last year. It kind of started off fast, and then you got a nice lull period in the activity, and then boom, it started getting active once again. So we'll see. When you start getting into these Enzo phases, the La Ninas, the El Ninos and stuff like that, when you start getting into a neutral phase, La Nina into neutral, you kind of have a little bit more activity in a sense, especially closer to the Gulf of Mexico. Especially if you have these warm waters down here, you're probably going to get a lot more development over here as opposed to what you deal with over the Central Atlantic, coming off of the western coast of Africa, developing over there and moving in. I can see where you get a lot more closer to home development. I will say one of the good things with that is that you would have, depending on how it moves and stuff, you would have less time for it to get as big of a potential it could be, as it were sitting out in the middle of the Atlantic, and it takes about 10 days for it to come on shore, and it's got all that time. So that's kind of one of the catches, kind of a catch-22, is you could get a lot of activity closer to home to begin with, but that could be a good thing because it's quicker to move on shore potentially. And so while you might not be dealing with a major hurricane, you can still be dealing with a hurricane, but it doesn't have a lot of time to get its strength, its act together possibly. So just one of the things that could be beneficial from doing that. Another thing would be, and I don't want to stray too far off the track here, but one of the other things I could see happen is that if you get a lot of activity to begin out the season, you can take a lot of the water's heat content away, and it's kind of the same idea as when we talk about severe weather and instability. If you have multiple rounds before the afternoon potential, you just take away all the instability, all the fuel for it to work with. So it's definitely early on. So I'm not saying that it's going to rob everything down here fuel wise, but if you do have a very active start in a very small portion of the globe down here in the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean, it could actually kind of help alleviate some of that fuel potential, and you get a big lull in the activity. But guess what? The water just gets heated back up again. So it gets prepared for another wave potentially moving on through. So that's just kind of the things that it could happen over the next several weeks to a couple of months.
Hey, Taylor, I want to make clear I wasn't trying to wrap you up. I was trying to upwelling.
The upwelling, yes. That's exactly what it is. It just, when we mentioned the storm surge and stuff with the waves, it just churns the waves up. And what it does is it brings the cooler water from underneath upwards. If you ever have dived into a lake, Smith Lake would be a perfect example here in the state of Alabama. If you're in the peak summer months, the water at the surface is going to be about 80, 90 degrees. But if you dive down and you get down even to just 10 feet or even more than that, you notice it gets cold really quickly. And so when you get the churning of the waves going on with the tropical systems, it brings that cooler water on top, and it just naturally cools the water down. Another thing why with the tropical systems, when they get closer to making landfall, if they start to slow down, the upwelling, it could be a Category 3 or Category 4 storm coming on shore, getting close. But if it slows down, all that fuel starts to kind of get wasted away. The water gets cooler, and all of a sudden you're dealing with not only just a weakening storm, but you've gone from a Category 4 potentially down to a Category 1. It can weaken it that fast
Yes.
in some instances. So yeah, that's just one of the things that it could happen if we get a very active start in a very small location. It can actually help things get cooler there and kind of create a lull in the activity for a longer period. And but then it gets refueled again, the water gets warmer, and then you can have another wave that kind of, another area of development kind of peak again in that area.
Well, man, that's going to do it for this edition of the Forecast with Stingray and TP. And TP, one more thing about the hurricane season. We are going to prepare you for the worst, but we are going to hope and pray that it is a very boring season
Oh
of
yes.
hurricanes. And we're also going to hope and pray and keep our fingers crossed that if we do have an active season, they will all curve back out into the Atlantic and
Yep.
not hit one place in America.
I'm exactly with you on that, and I just hope and pray that Louisiana doesn't see, what did they have, five
Seven.
landfalling, seven.
Seven.
It's seven. I knew it was up there. 7 landfalling tropical systems. That's just insane. I've never thought I could see where it's like 7 across the Gulf Coast, but
Yes.
I never would imagine it's just 7 in one state. So hopefully they don't have to deal with anything this
Yes.
year.
So tonight was just to prepare you for the worst, but we're going to hope and pray for the best and no hurricanes this season. So,
Exactly.
Taylor, thank you for joining me as always. And like
Mm-hmm.
you said, next week is going to be a rather wet week compared to what we saw this week.
Yeah, especially for places off to our west. So I don't think we're going to be dealing with big rainfall here.
Right.
I don't think we're going to be dealing with any flooding issues, but it's, I definitely think you're going to see more active weather. The dry stretch of weather is going to come to an end
Yes.
next week. But the good news is, if there's any good news, it's going to get warmer. We're going to kind of get back to normal, lower to mid 80s. But unfortunately, one of the flip sides of that is you're going to
Humidity.
get a lot more moisture in place. So that means the heat index, it's gonna be up there in the 90s.
Yes. Well, that's going to do it for this edition. Hopefully, you have enjoyed it and you've learned a lot about hurricanes and preparedness. Next week, we will be right back here for another edition of the Forecast with Stingray and TP. Hope you have a great rest of your evening, weekend, and as always, from all of us here at the Stingray, the Forecast with Stingray and TP, God bless.
See you guys.